Hey, good morning. It's Seth Chairpack. Welcome to the Quiet Authority podcast. And today's topic is one that I think everybody has been waiting for. We're going to talk about how your messaging is attracting the wrong audience. And if you're listening to this and you're either A, stuck in your warm network, in other words, most of your sales come from people who already know you or have known you for a while or from referrals, and you want to grow out of your warm network, but you've tried paid ads and organic content and all kinds of things to extend your audience. But it seems like every attempt to bring a new person in, a person who wasn't a referral, a person who hasn't known you for months or for years, then you run into these problems where the person is either just not responding to any messages at all, or you're getting some responses, but you can tell that the person is price shopping you, comparing you to a competitor. They're making buying decisions but not following through with them. They're ghosting on them. You send them a payment link, or they say, "Yeah, I'm going to sign up on such and such day," and then they ghost you. In other words, you're getting people who are basically called either tire kickers or price shoppers. And even if they do buy, even when they do buy, the problems don't stop there. They're late paying their invoices. They haggle with you about your prices. They're more likely to quit or to leave early. They're highly unlikely to leave you referrals, and they probably generate most of the complaints and most of the chaos and drama in your business. And meanwhile, you're trying to grow your business without having to create these bottlenecks from having to constantly have these conversations where you're justifying your price, where you're trying to tell them the difference between you and your competitor, and they just don't get it. They think that the same thing is offered at a lower price from somebody else, and they don't really understand the value and the quality of what you offer. It's incredibly frustrating. And even when they do decide to buy, they don't really decide. They procrastinate, they put things off. Once they do buy, typically they're the biggest pain in the neck. They're most likely to ask for a refund. They're least likely to actually use the product that they bought. You know who I'm talking about, right? I'm going to call these buyers low altitude buyers. Now, I'm choosing that word because I'm basically talking in terms of their altitude in life. This doesn't make them bad people. That's not what this is about. A person can be at a really low altitude in life where they're stuck in the underbelly of life and they have addictions and all kinds of other things. And then we have going up from there. As the altitude gets higher, we have people of higher status, people who make more money, people who have more purchasing power. And not only that, people, the higher altitude a person is, the faster they make decisions and the more likely they are to stick to those decisions. And that's why they're where they are in their life, is because their decision making process is different than people who are down here. This is really simple, right? So what you want in your business is to attract more of these high altitude people. If that's a yes, then this is going to be the most important training that you've ever heard since you've been in business. And I do not say that lightly. I know a lot of people are talking about this, but there's nobody out there who's actually talking about how to solve this problem on a deeper psychological level. We'll talk about that in a second. But the question is, your messaging attracting these low altitude buyers? Now, let's find out if that's a yes first. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You're marketing, you're putting content out there, you're paying for ads, you're networking, you're doing everything you can to outreach and to find new clients for your business. And it just seems like almost everybody out there is price sensitive, is shopping you against competitors. And you're thinking, where the heck are all these people who have this money, who are high quality decision makers, who once they say yes to you are likely to bring you referrals, are likely to actually use your product, are likely to follow your instructions, right? If you're like at a marketing agency or some other type of firm where you're providing expert guidance and the person has to cooperate with you to get the result. Lower altitude people are just less cooperative. They're harder to work with. They're procrastinators. They're perfectionists. They're people who really are caught up in their own bad decision making. Again, doesn't make them bad people, but that's the reason why they don't have a lot of money to spend, and also the behaviors that actually have them broke in their life will typically import into their relationship with you, especially if you're working with them. And they're going to have to check things 1,000 times before they approve them because everything has to be perfect. They're going to be indecisive. They're going to be changing their mind all the time. This probably sounds familiar to you. Those are the types of people we're talking about. Now, if your messaging is creating this problem, here's what that's going to look like. First of all, you're going to be looking at these other people out there who are building these businesses that are just exploding from the ground up. Maybe they're growing 10 times as fast as yours is. They started their business a year ago and they're already making 5, 10 times as much as you are right now. And you've been in business for years. And you're looking at them and you're thinking, how are they getting all these people that are spending this money with them? Where are all these quote high paying clients? That will sound familiar, but you'll also notice something else. If your messaging is actually attracting low altitude buyers, you're going to literally feel like you're living in a different reality. I remember when I was a kid, I used to like to go fishing with my dad, and we would go out sometimes either on the boat or on the pier, and we'd be fishing and we'd just be catching a bunch of the trash fish, bottom feeders that you can't possibly eat without getting 3 days of food poisoning. The fish that eat the bottom stuff off of the ocean. But there would be someone like literally 100 yards away, maybe in a boat or on the pier, and they're pulling up the type of fish that they serve in five-star restaurants. And so you move over there to try to like get a little bit of that action. You're still catching the same types of fish. Meanwhile, they're catching all kinds of other fish. You look at their gear, you look at the way they're fishing, you look at their bait, and nothing seems to be different. You can't actually spot the thing that the person's doing. And it's literally like they're sitting beside you and living in an alternate universe where there are all these clients saying, hey, take my money, give me your thing. In fact, if you're attracting a lot of low altitude buyers, you probably also had this experience where somebody gets on the phone with you or on your webinar, they don't buy the thing that you're offering, and they may even tell you they're broke, and then you find out they spent two, three, four, five, $10,000 on somebody else's thing, and it's one of these popular gurus who's attracting all these people with money, and you're just thinking, what the heck is it? It's literally like you're living in a different reality. You're sitting there catching all the fish that nobody wants to eat. And here's someone right over here who's catching all the great fish. And it literally feels like there's something wrong. I don't know exactly what it is. And so you try print advertising, you try beefing up your referrals, you try writing a book, you try putting more organic content out there. You even take the advice that a lot of these gurus are taking, where you build a funnel, you copy hack their funnel and try to reverse engineer it. You try to call out to the target audience. This is a really good one where they say, we only work with people making $10,000 or more a month, or we only work with high status executives. That you'll try to put this superficial language in there, and yet who do you keep attracting? These low altitude clients. And so you're probably thinking, what the heck is it? It's got to be, is it my targeting? And so then you go, okay, these people obviously who I'm looking for are not on Facebook. So you stop marketing on Facebook. You go over to Instagram. You have the same problem. You go over to YouTube. You go to print advertising. You go to cold email. You go to networking meetings where you're showing up there and there's a bunch of people in the room who have all kinds of money. And it just so happens that the leads you come home with, even when you think it's a high quality lead, you find out a couple of weeks later that person's indecisive. They're a perfectionist. They're comparing you to others, and they end up buying from somebody else. And even when you attract one of these high altitude buyers, they seem to just kind of disappear. You don't really realize, like, why did they ghost that call with me? Why didn't they show up? Why did they say, yeah, let me talk to the other decision makers, and then I never heard from them again? Does this sound familiar? Well, I have been helping people solve this problem for more than 20 years. And what I'm going to show you today is going to first, it's going to scare the crap out of you. And that's actually a good thing, because when you realize you're doing something wrong, you go, oh my God, that's what I'm doing. Then you have the opportunity to change it very quickly. So the first thing it's going to do, it's going to scare you. It's probably going to discourage you a little bit, but then it's going to give you this little glimmer of hope that you didn't have before. Because what I'm going to show you today is scientifically valid. I'm going to show you the science behind it. I'm going to give you concrete examples. And this is going to make so much sense to you. You're not even going to have to go out and research it. Your own intuition and life experience is going to go, that's it. That's the thing I've been missing. So first of all, let's talk about what's actually happening. Okay. Low altitude versus high altitude people. Lower altitude people are where they are in their life because of their decision making process. The way they make decisions is creating the results in their life. And we cannot assume that their decision make, their deep psychological structures, what's called their value intelligence, is somehow going to change because we write a really persuasive email, right? Persuasion is one thing. Changing people's nature, that's a completely different thing. I do not teach people to do that. So you cannot convert a low altitude person into a high altitude person. I have done some of that in my coaching because I've helped a lot of people go from making nothing to making a lot of money. But there's a lot of one on one deep work that I have to do with that person to dig out the decision structures that are keeping them stuck in life, and I have to have their permission and cooperation. And even then, it's difficult. Like, this is a hard job for psychologists and coaches to do, who actually have a lot of years of training. So forget it. You're not going to do it in your marketing. You're not going to. There's no magical email sequence or marketing funnel where you're going to change a low altitude person into a high altitude person. You want to help them if you can. That's great. We're going to talk about how to do that in another podcast. But the point is that you want to target the people who already come to you with a strong decision making structure, right? And because of that, they have a lot of money. They have a lot of confidence. They stick to things when they say yes. And these are the types of people you want to work for. So it's not about changing low. And a lot of the time with your objections, when you're on sales calls, you're trying to overcome an objection. And what you're really doing is trying to change the basic nature of the person. And it's never going to happen, no matter how good you are at selling, no matter how good you are at overcoming objections, because you're not overcoming an objection. You're not selling. You're not persuading. You're literally trying to change somebody's deep psychology. Okay. So that ought to give you some relief. You're not going to have to work hard once you realize what's actually going on. You see what I'm going to show you today. You're going to start attracting people who already come to you with a strong and healthy decision making structure, a lot of confidence, a lot of money, a lot of connections that they can bring you referrals from, because you are attracting a different person. Now, you're probably thinking, Seth, this sounds like almost too good to be true. I promise you that it is not. I have seen this categorical change in people's businesses many, many times. So let's first talk about the science, and then I'm going to give you some exact examples of what I'm talking about. And I'm also going to give you some AI prompts that you can put into AI, where you can put your message into AI. You can put one of these prompts into AI, and it'll evaluate it and look for these subtle signals in your language patterns that are attracting the wrong clients, and it's going to tell you how to change them. And I also just got done writing an entire book about this, which has a complete deep dive breakdown. If you're interested in getting a hold of that, message me on social media. It's not out yet, but it's going to be out very soon. So first, let's talk about what's happening. So we have high altitude, low altitude people, right? Number one, there are actually three types of intelligence that human beings have. Most people don't know this. We talk a lot about IQ, right? IQ is the capability for pattern recognition. Obviously, IQ people are considered smart because they can recognize patterns very quickly and they can relate one pattern to another. But you've probably known a lot of people who have a very high IQ and are still stuck in life. They're still repeating the bad types of relationships. They may be stuck in addictions. They may be broke. A lot of people with high IQ are broke because of the fact that they have a high IQ, because there's two other types of intelligence which are deeper than IQ. Now, IQ is the first one, right? But it has nothing to do with a person's status. So you cannot attract a higher status people by speaking in more of like a more like pedantic type of intellectual. These are smart people. My people are smart. I want to talk to smart people. You're not going to do it by appealing to their IQ or to their logic. That's just not going to happen. It's important to do that. I do talk about how to do that, but logic is not why people sell. It's how they justify their buying decision. That's why you don't use logic until really, really deep down the funnel. That's a tip there. So second type of intelligence is emotional intelligence, or called EQ. EQ is basically the ability to self-regulate. Everybody has ups and downs. We have days when we feel better than the others. Our emotions kind of go like this. They're not steady, right? Even the most stoic person in the world, they may have a kind of emotional wavelength that's like this, and some people are kind of like this, and some people are like this, and they stay stuck here, and then you know what I'm talking about, right? So the ability to create a steady rhythm and not allow your emotions to make your decisions for you, allowing yourself like to actually make decisions based on your deeper intelligence, which we'll talk about in a second, instead of being impulsive, instead of staying stuck like in a really low vibration or high vibration. I'm not talking about weird woo woo energy. I'm talking about like your nervous system. Our ability to self regulate is connected to our EQ. That's deeper than IQ. Now, if your messaging knows how to speak to the person with the right EQ, you're almost there, but not quite. We're going to talk about that in a second. What nobody else in the world, no other marketer, no other copywriter but myself is talking about is the third level of intelligence, which is a scientifically validated type of intelligence called VQ. And VQ is your value intelligence, and it drives all of your decisions, especially the high pressure, high stakes decisions that you make. Most people haven't heard of VQ, but value intelligence is based on the science of formal axiology. It's got its own scientific journal out there. You can go and read it. This is a valid science that has the highest capability in predicting a person's decisions under pressure, right? The VQ test, the Hartman value profile, it's called if you really want to get geeky about it, has the highest success rate of any scoring mechanism, whatever you want to call it, to determine how a person is likely to act under pressure. And it measures value by three dimensions. I'm not going to get into those because those are complicated, but I talk about them in all of my books, all my personal growth books, all my marketing books, and my entire messaging and copywriting framework that takes a person from being a complete stranger to someone who's buying from you again and again is all based on these three types of intelligence, with the priority being on value intelligence, because that's what drives people's decisions. You're probably thinking, okay, what does this have to do with high altitude, low altitude? The If a person has a high IQ, they can still be low altitude. If a person has a high EQ, they can kind of be in here, but they can kind of waver between these two. The people who really have this high status place in life where they're making a lot of money, they're confident, they have the capability and the willingness to pay you what you're really worth. Whether they know the term or not, they have a very high and healthy VQ, right? Value intelligence. So what do you do in your languaging, in your messaging, is you understand not how to speak to their IQ, not just how to speak to their EQ, but how to speak to their VQ. And what happens in most copywriting, in fact, a lot of copywriting advice out there works really well on people who have low emotional intelligence, people who are impulsive, right? People who make decisions when they're really, really excited about something, but then change their mind immediately because they don't self-regulate very well. And so a lot of the copywriting advice out there is very effective for selling to people who are lower altitude because it knows how to emotionally manipulate a person. And so I hope you're starting to see part of the problem here. You can create stuff that is very effective in converting the wrong person. It's like a dog whistle, right? You blow a dog whistle, nobody else hears it, the dog comes running. Why? Because the dog hears it. Well, there are subtle things in our language, subtle signals in our language that you're probably using every day and you're probably hearing every day and you don't even know it. But when you hear somebody else speak who is giving off these language signals, you can immediately tell, even if you can't point out and say, oh, they said this, and therefore I can tell they're a low altitude person. There's just something in your gut, your intuition, that tells you this person's a force to be reckoned with. This is a person who really has their act together. This is a person who has a lot of confidence. And what your mind is doing is detecting these language patterns and you don't even know what they are. What this is going to do, what today's training is going to do, is help you to consciously recognize those signals when you're speaking, when you're writing, when another person's speaking, so that you can change it and you can adjust and start speaking the language of higher altitude people. Okay. So that is what we're going to talk about today. And we're going to get into some practical examples. So thank you for being patient with me while I laid a foundation. Listen, if I hadn't done everything I just did and I just gave you these prompts, this would absolutely not work for you, because even AI gets this wrong. You can take the prompts I'm about to give you, put them into AI, and AI doesn't understand this concept unless you train it in this concept. And when it does, finally, it starts creating the results you want. But I don't want to just give you a bunch of prompts that you plop in there without actually knowing what's happening. We are speaking to a person's value intelligence. Now, let's break things down here and talk about the difference between people who are high altitude versus low altitude. And again, this is not designed to like judge anybody or to label anybody in a category. This just happens to be the way that the world works, right? 1% of the people make most of the money. That is not an accident, right? It's because of their decision making criteria, their VQ. And so the first thing is, let's talk about emotional regulation. Okay. When you're speaking to a lower altitude person, you're if your copy is doing it wrong, if the signals in your copy are calling out to these people, you're going to say things to them that outsource their emotional regulation to something external. In other words, you're basically telling them that whatever feelings they have, whether they're good or bad, are not dependent on something that's going on inside them, but something that's going on outside of them. Now, I'm going to give you some examples. You're going to be blown away by how subtle this is. Okay. In fact, I'm not going to tell you. I'm see if you can just spot which one is right and which one is wrong. We're going to go to health and fitness first. And you can participate here in the chat. Just tell me which one is signaling low altitude people and which one is signaling high altitude people. I'm going to give you two examples, example A and example B. Now, listen, I'm not doing this to trick anybody or make anybody feel bad for getting the wrong answer. What I want to do is develop self-awareness, because I bet there's a lot of you on here who are going to hear the low altitude version and go, yeah, I bet that's the better copy. But The reason why you're attracting the people you are right now is because you're evaluating your copy based on whether it speaks to these low altitude people. You're not doing it consciously, but now you can after knowing this. Okay, so let's read two examples from we're going to start with health and fitness. We're going to go through a bunch of different industries so that this becomes crystal clear. So I'm going to give you example A is going to sound like this. Finally get in shape without stress. This will feel easy from day one. Okay. Now, it's a little clunky because I had AI generated, but that's the first example. Finally get in shape without stress. This will feel easy from day one. Right. Here's the second example. You'll feel friction first, but the plan is simple and you'll practice consistency, especially on low motivation days. Okay. Those are two different examples. Now, you can take most people who are going to hear those two things and they may be able to guess which one is right. But what are the subtle signals in those two examples that are calling out to different audiences? How many of you guessed that the first one was the example for the lower altitude people? Just put a yes in the chat if you guessed at the first one. Put number one. Which one do you think is for the lower altitude audience? Is it number one or number two? Don't be shy. Just put the answer in there. This is not about being right or wrong. This is about creating self awareness. Is it one or two that's speaking to the lower altitude? Everyone's afraid to say it. Okay, so it's number one. Now, listen carefully again for the thing we were talking about, outsourcing of emotional regulation. In other words, I'm telling somebody else that your feelings are dependent on something that's going on outside of you, right? So if I say to them, this program's going to finally get you in shape without all the stress you typically have from going on a diet. And the good news is it's going to be so easy from day one that you're going to feel an excitement that you haven't felt in years, right? That sounds like good copy, but notice the subtle dog whistle that's telling them that there's something that's actually going to cause you to feel no stress at all. There's no such thing, right? If something's going to change your life, it's going to cause you to feel some stress, some pressure, some anxiety. Now, you don't want to come out and say that because it'll turn them off in your copy. But what I'm essentially doing is I'm soothing a person who has a low capability to regulate their emotions. And so, of course, it's going to appeal to those people. But those are your low altitude people who don't have a lot of money. They're going to respond to your ads. They're going to show up on a call. They're going to say, let me think about it. They're going to compare you by price. They're going to do all those things. And you're going to think, what am I doing? I got to change my messaging. So you go and change your messaging. You know, nope, it's calling out to the benefits, making it sound easy. And then you might add something like, we work only with CEOs and executives. Let's talk about that for a second. A lot of the time when people try to call out to the right audience, they're only talking about superficial things, about labels, like the role they play in life, the amount of money that they make. Maybe they even mention something about like the neighborhood the person lives in. Here's the problem. The lower altitude people, if they're dreamers, they want to have all those things. And so, of course, that ad's still going to appeal to them because they want to be that person. And the person who does recognize it, let's say you put that ad out there and say, we only work with C suite executives, and a C suite executive sees that, listen very carefully, and they see that, and then they keep reading, but they start to subconsciously, without even knowing it, detect these subtle language patterns that seem to be calling out to someone who's making their emotional regulation external. They will leave your ad, they'll leave your webinar, they'll stop reading. You, in other words, the things that you're saying that are attracting these low altitude people are also repelling the right people. And all you have to do is change it, and it's going to flip that. You're going to start repelling the people who are lower out. And listen, it's not that we don't want to help those people. We can start, if we just make a ton of money and we start a charity that helps those people. Not trying to be a smart ass, seriously. Like, go for the people who have the money first, build a really big successful business, and then start a charitable foundation if you really want to help the people without a lot of money. But if you try to do it the other way around and build your business based on people who are broke, you'll never rise high enough in your altitude to where you can actually help the people you want to help. So you're not being compassionate by speaking to these people and trying to build your business on that. You would be more compassionate to go after the people who really have a high altitude capability to create results in their life, get them to pay you money, bring you referrals, make a ton of money, start a non-for-profit, whatever. That's a whole side rail, but this is typically what people will do. They'll say, well, I want to help these people, and they'll stay stuck. So the right way is, listen to this again. When you start this diet plan, you'll feel friction at first, but the plan is simple and you'll practice consistently, even on your low motivation days, and you'll start to see transformations that you haven't seen in years. Notice the subtle difference. First of all, I'm telling them they're going to feel friction, but I'm telling them that the plan is simple, right? People who are high altitude don't like to they don't want to have to do something that's going to cause them to spend a lot of their time on it. They value their time more than they value their money. So you got to show them that they're going to get leverage. They're going to put less time into it and they're going to get a bigger result. But here's the trick: you don't tell them they're going to put less effort into it. You don't tell them that they're going to feel no stress. You don't tell them that their basic happiness is dependent on them being able to get a result. And then you say, especially on your low motivation days, right? Notice I didn't say the days when you feel depressed, the days when I talked about low motivation days, right? So those are the subtle language patterns. You see, the wrong version promises to soothe the emotions of somebody who can't soothe themselves, right? So you're speaking to a lower altitude person. That's the difference in the health and fitness. Let's look at a few more examples, and then I'll give you a prompt that you can plop into AI, and you can actually, in fact, if you stick around, I'll give you this. I'll give you this prompt as a reward for sticking around. But let's look at the second example. This is from the therapy or coaching world. Now, example number one is, we'll keep you feeling calm and confident the whole time you're working with us. We'll keep you feeling calm and confident the whole time you're working with us. That's example number one. Example number two, we'll build the skills so you can stay steady when you're triggered and choose your next move from intention instead of impulse. Now, I might change the intention instead of impulse, but we'll build skills so you can stay steady when you're triggered and choose your next move. Hear the difference? In other words, the first version subtly communicates to them that I'm kind of going to be mothering them and nurturing them and making them feel better. The second one says, no, we're going to empower you so that you can have the skills to make different choices, right? In other words, I am talking to their capability for self regulation, right? When I'm talking to the first type of person, I'm basically saying, we're going to be your regulators. See the difference? It's very subtle, but there was a article written in the Journal of Language and Social Psychology in the early 2000s that actually talked about this, what I'm talking about right now, and it called it powerless language. And I'm not talking about and ah and all those fillers that they teach you not to do in Toastmasters. Those aren't the things that actually hurt your confidence and make you sound low altitude. There's more subtle language patterns that we're decoding in this live. And this article in the Journal of Language and Social Psychology basically found that when a person uses what's called powerless language, or what I'm calling low altitude language, they were less likely to believed in court, even if they were an attorney. Right? Think about that. A jury was more likely to find their client guilty if they use these powerful language patterns, powerless language patterns. It had nothing to do with the facts of the case. That's really scary, right? They did the same type of analysis on people who were lecturing, people who were selling, people who were speaking from stage, people who were preaching in churches. These powerless language patterns are things that you're saying and doing in your writing. And guess what? AI is very bad at creating copy that speaks to low altitude people. It's such a big problem that I actually had to create an entire like ebook and prompt set just to get it not to do this. And even then, I still have to stake my expertise and analyze it and go, well, here's where AI missed the mark. And again, that's because most people in life are, they're not really happy where they are. They're not getting where they want to be. And so AI is learning off all that content. And guess what language it's importing into the responses it's giving you? Low altitude language, because most people are not at this super high altitude. So if you want to reach these people who are like the top 5-10%, you can't use AI by itself to do it. You have to be co-piloting it with a system like mine. Let's talk about why this therapy one didn't work. Again, I'm framing calmness as the service that I'm providing rather than selling it as a capacity for them to develop themselves. Let's look at another example. This is business to business implementation, or ops. So I'm talking to people who are like, are implementers in businesses. This program can be executed with no overwhelm. We'll handle everything so that you never feel lost. Let's say that well, I don't know what it meant, implementation ops. I'm going to assume they're talking about in marketing agency. AI kind of messed up here. So I would say, we're going to handle everything so that you can run your business without overwhelm and you never feel lost, right? That's the first example. Now, was I speaking to low or high altitude people? Some of you are starting to get it. Now, let me give you the second example. We'll handle the build, but you'll still make the weekly decisions. Clarity will come from review, not from reassurance. Now, I'd reword a little bit of that. I wouldn't use the word reassurance, but notice what it's doing there. The bad example, the wrong example, the first one is removing the expectation of them having to make decisions. I'm basically saying when you hire us, you're outsourcing your decision making and we're taking care of everything. A low altitude person loves to hear that because they don't want to make decisions. They're bad at it. It exhausts them. It messes with their emotional regulation. A high altitude person is going to hear that and go, hell no. I want to be involved in the decision making process because that's what's made me successful today. See the difference? It's so subtle that you're probably listening to this and thinking, oh my God, how many times am I actually calling out to the wrong audience with these subtle language signals? Okay, so here's what you can do. If you stuck around this far, I'm going to give you a prompt you can give. I'm going to warn you about using this prompt. Do not overuse this, okay? AI may not understand what I mean by it. I recommend you also wait for my book to come out, which is going to talk about this in specific detail and tell you all the ways that your message, whether you're speaking from stage, from a webinar, on your emails, on your copy, you're calling out and signaling to lower altitude people and repelling the wrong people. And these language patterns are so subtle that I do not recommend you only rely on the prompt I'm about to give you. I want you to get my book when it comes out. Okay. So here's the prompt. Take this. I'm going to put it into the messaging here. I'll put it into Instagram since Instagram people typically don't see it in my chat unless I put it there. And then I'll put it in the main chat. Okay. So this prompt is basically telling AI to scan your content for anything that is outsourcing their emotional regulation, right? Now, you may not know what that means. You may be still listening. You don't quite get what I mean by that. That's okay. AI will know what it means, and it's going to give you a point by point breakdown and tell you the places where you're going wrong. It's not going to rewrite it for you. You would need my help for that, or you'd need my book. But let's go to the next one. So the second thing you want to look for, we're not going to get, there's 7 points. I may do a part 2 of this, but there's second thing that, and this is so common. The second thing that a lot of people do in their messaging and their copywriting that's subtly calling out to these lower altitude people in your audience is cost avoidance instead of value gain. Cost avoidance instead of value gain. This is huge. A person who is at a lower altitude in life, they evaluate everything based on cost, right? They see the cost of everything and the value of nothing. They might kind of think about value, but for the most part, they see 2 shampoos. They look at the lower price one, they grab the lower price one. They don't open it, they don't look at like the ingredients and research it and stuff like that because they make decisions based on cost. This one costs more, this one costs less, right? That price shopping that you're attracting, I'm about to show you one reason you're attracting those people. A higher altitude person thinks about, okay, what am I going to gain? What value am I purchasing by doing this? And listen, you can't just explicitly say this on your sales calls and expect to change a low altitude person to a high altitude person, right? You're again trying to change their nature. So I want you to listen very carefully. I'm going to take an example from finance. Okay. So this is a finance niche here. And I'm going to give you 2 examples. Excuse me. Losing my voice a little bit. And then I want you to tell me which one of these is calling out to the wrong audience. Here's the first one. This plan will fix your money without you having to give up the things you love, right? This plan will fix your finances without having to give up the shopping habits you love, or something like that. I don't really like the way it worded that, so I reworded it a little bit. In other words, this is going to help you get out of debt without having to be on a budget. Let's say that. Get out of debt without being on a budget. It's basically saying, I'm going to fix your money problems. You're not going to have to change anything you're doing right now. Does a low altitude person want to hear that? Absolutely. They're always looking for the too good to be true thing and believing it's too good to be true. It's not too good to be true. Now listen to this one. You'll pick trade-offs. We'll set constraints and follow them long enough to see your numbers change. Now listen to how that you probably hear that and you think, well, that sounds, I don't even know what you're talking about. A low altitude person is not going to have any idea what that means. But it's a dog whistle to high altitude people because it's saying, you'll pick your financial priorities. We will help you to set constraints until you start seeing your numbers change. You start seeing your debt go down. You start seeing your savings go up because you're disciplining yourself and you're following a structure that gets results every time. I'm telling them that they're going to get value. I'm not saying they're going to avoid cost, right? Or I could say, grow your business without breaking your bank account. Something really simple like that we think sounds clever. That is a dog whistle to lower altitude people. Why? Because I'm saying, hey, you're going to get to avoid the cost. You're not going to have to give this up. You're not going to have to stop doing this. We'll grow your business without changing your messaging. I would never tell a person that because I don't want to attract the type of people who believe that I'm going to do that. I'm not going to. If you want to grow your business with me, you're going to be changing your messaging. We're going to talk about that resistance in a second. But the point is that I'm telling the lower altitude person subtly that their progress does not require sacrifice, does not require sacrifice. And I'm doing it very subtly, but it's going to attract the wrong people. When I'm talking to the high altitude person, I am talking about the sacrifice. I'm being transparent about it, but I'm really framing the value and the outcome. A person who has a lot of money doesn't think, how much does something cost? They think, how much is it going to get me? What is it going to do for me? Right? So that's what we're subtly calling out to. Let's take another example. This is from if you're selling a software as a service platform, like a marketing tool, right? I can say, turn this software on and watch your leads multiply, right? Install this software and watch your leads and conversions multiply. Sounds like a good ad, right? Now listen to this one. Install this software, review performance weekly, and watch your results come. What does that say? Iteration, not installation. Okay, it said something dumb there. Install this software, review performances weekly, and make the tweaks that will explode your sales by 5 or 10x, right? Notice what I did there. I talked about their involvement in the decision making, the review, the things they're going to be doing. I didn't just tell them I'm going to plug the software in, I'm going to install the software, and it's going to make them a ton of money. That's a subtle difference, but I'm telling them, here's what's going to be required from you. Here's the output that you're going to get. So I am again cueing them to the sacrifice they're going to be making as they work for me. If I don't do that, I'm going to attract a whole bunch of people who just think about the cost of everything and the value of nothing. Those are the lower altitude people. This is very, very subtle, but I guarantee your messaging's doing it. If you're attracting a lot of price shoppers and people comparing, you're saying something that's actually creating this impression in your marketing. Now you're probably thinking, well, what if I sell real estate? Same thing. Same thing. What if I sell life insurance? Same thing. What if I'm a mortgage broker? If you're listening to this and thinking, well, this doesn't apply to my industry, if you're talking to people, it does. Okay. So here's the next prompt. What you're going to do is take this one that I'm about to put here in the chat, and this is going to train. You take this prompt, you put it into AI, you put your copy into AI, and it's going to evaluate it and find out if you're telling them that they're going to avoid cost or that they're going to get value. And it's very, very subtle. Maybe now you have to be careful. If you tell AI to do this and say, well, reframe it to where it actually talks about getting value instead of avoiding cost. And AI is just doing this weird thing recently where it's like, you're going to avoid the cost and get the value of it. And it'll literally like use word for word what your feedback is. I actually am creating a prompt that stops it from doing that. It's called my humanized prompt, but I'm still working on it. So you can't point blank tell AI to do this without actually importing some psychology on how to do it without sounding too abrupt or too obvious or weird about it, right? Let's take another example. This is the last one we're going to do for today. Then we're going to wrap up. I've got 7 more of the, so I've got 7 total. This is the third one. And in my book, I have like 13 chapters that break down every single subtle language signal that you're using in your copy that's attracting these people who don't have money and these people who like compare you to competitors and stuff like that. And more importantly, it tells you how to change them and gives multiple examples from various industries. Okay, we're going to take one more here. This one is huge. Identity without evidence. Identity without evidence. In other words, your copy hands somebody a flattering label before they've earned it. In other words, you hear this a lot, and Anthony Robbins talks about this, and he is wrong about this. This works on some types of buyers, but not on others. And it definitely works if you're Anthony Robbins and have brand power already. But there's a lot of people out there who are only getting results because they've developed this amazing brand and they stopped doing the things that actually got them there. And now they're doing something else, but they're getting away with it because they are who they are. This is why you got to be really careful about copying and modeling successful people, which is something else that Anthony Robbins teaches, right? Doing what he does in your marketing and saying what he says in your marketing is not going to work for you because he's getting away with, and I've seen a lot of bad marketing from him lately. He's getting away with things that he would have never gotten away with if nobody knew who he was. So don't be fooled by this whole thing. People will say, well, you got to create an identity they can step into. That will appeal to low altitude people. Okay. And you'll get away with it if you're Anthony Robbins, but if you're not, you got to do it the right way. So if your copywriting puts a flattering label on them, like high performer, next level, or creates an identity that they have not earned, you're going to get what I call identity tourists. These are people who like to try on identities the same way that they would try on a shirt, but it doesn't actually fit them. They're not going to wear it out there. And listen, the people you're talking to, they want to be these people. They want to have these identities. They want to have the results so bad that they will respond to your copy if they see that you're going to help them make go from 10,000 to $100,000 a month. That is not going to stop people making less than $10,000 a month from responding to your ads. If you're talking only to C-suite executives and you say this is only for C-suite executives, I promise you that people who are not C-suite executives but want to be or want to just dream about that identity, they will respond to you, and that's who you're going to get, especially if everything you say after that has these subtle signals that call out to these low altitude people and repel the high altitude ones. So putting these labels on your copy by saying attention such and such and thinking you're going to get such and such, that doesn't work. Thinking that you're going to talk about the income level or the size of their business and that that's going to attract those people, if the rest of your copy has any of these subtle signals that call out to low altitude people and that repel high altitude people, it ain't going to matter what you say or who you're talking to. You're still going to keep catching the fish that eat off the bottom of the ocean instead of the fish that they serve in five-star restaurants. Okay. So here are some examples of it. We'll go to the coaching industry. So let's say that my ad opens up by saying, you're a high level operator. You're built differently. Like I say something like that. Or you're the type of person who is not settling for less in life, right? Now that sounds, well, like Seth, that sounds like good copy. Why would I not say that to a person? The problem is you're giving them identity that they haven't earned, right? Now, let's look at the right way to do this because you're probably thinking, well, yeah, but how do I actually talk to those people who are in that identity already? I mean, wouldn't I say the same thing? Listen to this. This is for people who run weekly reviews, make hard calls, and execute even when they don't feel like it. Now, notice what I did there. I listened very carefully. I affirmed their identity, but I did it by talking about the actions that they take every day and how they take those actions despite what their mood is doing. In other words, I called back in the emotional regulation point we talked about earlier, and I imported that into my description. I didn't just say you're a high level person, right? I said you run weekly reviews, you know your numbers, you're making the hard calls and the decisions, but you just feel like the word all keeps ending back in your lap. We're going to show you how to delegate in such a way to where you can spend all of your time, all your attention on the things that are really moving the needle in your business, even on the days when you don't feel quite as motivated. That's me talking to a high altitude person. It's such a subtle difference. It's so easy to get this wrong, which is why I wrote a whole book on it, right? So we'll give you one more example from the fitness industry. Actually, let's go to education and skill building. I would say become a master in 7 days, become fluent in 7 days, right? I'm talking about, no. I did that wrong. Become a master French speaker in 7 days, let's say. The word master is an identity. It's a label that I'm assigning to that person that they have not earned yet because they haven't learned the language and become a master yet. Now listen to how I would do that if I were talking to a person who is high altitude. You'll do the drills, you'll submit the work, you'll review your mistakes and repeat until you get better and better and better. And finally, one day, it'll come so naturally to you. It'll come as naturally to you as you speak, right? I improvised that one. But notice that I didn't say anything about them becoming a master. I instead talked about the process that they're going to go through as they start to see the result. And then I painted a picture of the result. What a lot of people would do is they'll just talk about the end result, make it sound really great, talk about what you don't have to do to get there. And then they'll talk about like, are you tired of? And then when they talk about the problem they're tired of, they'll make a lot of references that subtly tell the person that your emotional regulation, your emotional health is not dependent on something that you do inside yourself, but on something that's on the outside of you. And as soon as you change this thing on the outside of you, all of a sudden you're going to start feeling better. See, all three of the mistakes. Now, what I just said to a lot of people would hear that and go, well, that sounds like good copy. It sounds like you did a good job there. But there are subtle things in the framing and the language patterns that are going to cause people to buy, but it's going to be the wrong people. And when they show up on your calls, they're going to say, let me think about it. They're going to say, let me talk to such and such. They're going to compare you to competitors. They're going to bicker about price. They're not going to bring you referrals. They're going to be more likely to refund. They're basically going to be those pain in the butt clients who are maybe like are generating almost all of the drama in your business and paying you the least amount of money. That's called the 80-20 rule. The good news is you can flip that. We've discovered in this live 3 incredibly subtle language patterns that are embedded into your messaging right now. Listen, if you're listening to this and you're thinking, well, I'm attracting a lot of the wrong audience, but I don't think I'm making these mistakes, that's your first obstacle. Because here's what happens. I'll close with this. If you're interested in getting my book when it comes out, it's going to be a steal, right? If you're a person who only thinks about cost, you're not going to buy my book, okay? Because it costs something. I'm not giving it away for free, but it's going to be incredibly valuable. In fact, when you take this book, when you get a hold of this book and you start applying this stuff in your business using some of the strategies that I give you, you are going to notice a very, very fast difference in who responds to you and, more importantly, how they respond. I promise you, if you implement this, it will work. I've seen it happen many times. But I want to talk about one last thing. There's a lot of people listening today, and I know there's going to be a lot of people listening on YouTube, and that's good. But here's going to be your number one obstacle. And this is going to be a big, big obstacle that you're really going to have to tell your brain to sit down and shut up if this objection comes up. It's not in my voice. This doesn't sound like me. This doesn't sound like my brand. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that as a copywriter. Many, many times I'll go in there, I'll analyze the person's messaging, and the person tells me, we're attracting the wrong audience. We're not making enough money. We're not getting conversions. The people who are converting aren't bringing referrals. All their complaints tell me that their messaging is attracting the wrong people. And I'm very thorough about it. I ask them where they've marketed, who they've marketed to. I make sure that I'm not misdiagnosing them. And when I find out that their messaging is actually the problem, typically what I'll do, and this doesn't happen much anymore because I don't attract these types of people as much, but I run into them occasionally, where I start to rewrite their copy, revise their copy, and they immediately come out with the objection. We got to revise this. It doesn't sound like our brand. It doesn't sound like me. This is not in my voice. That is going to be your number one obstacle. And it's going to be the major point of resistance because listen very carefully. Your voice right now, the way you're talking, the way you're messaging to people, it's attracting the wrong audience. And there's a deeper thing going on that if the language you're using is attracting these types of people, then there is a deeper transformation that this is going to challenge you to make. And that's the good thing about doing this. When you start changing your language in the way you communicate in your copy, and you start reading it and you start doing it on your presentations, on your sales calls, you're going to notice a difference in yourself, and your altitude is going to begin to raise as you start to insert beliefs, language patterns that actually change your value intelligence. This is something I have a whole book about this called Awaken Your Shadow that talks about what Carl Jung calls shadow work, where you identify the parts of you that are holding you back and you start to make these subtle changes in your belief systems through your language. Now, there's one layer deeper than language that I talk about in that book that we won't get into today. I have a YouTube live on that already, but here's the point. The people that you're attracting right now, it's your messaging. You are saying subtle things in your messaging that are signaling to people who are creating these problems in your business, aren't buying from you, complaining about price shoppers, comparing you to competitors. And if that language doesn't change because you're like, well, this is in my voice, this doesn't sound like my brand, and you go in there and start subtly changing the things that actually make the difference I'm talking about today, you'll keep attracting the wrong people. And I've seen it happen a lot of the time, where the hardest job as a copywriter is not getting my clients results. The hardest job is getting them to actually publish what I wrote for them without their mindset getting in the way. And I know immediately when I hear a person say, it's not in my brand, it's not in my voice, we need to change this, this, and that, I make an attempt to educate them, telling them what I'm telling you today. But I could bet all the money I have in the bank that if the person ends up making changes, they're going to break the copy and it's going to get them the same results. Why? Because it's not in my voice. Your voice that you speak in doesn't have to represent you, right? Like, this is your business. The way you're marketing is not to flatter your ego and to make you feel good about yourself and to feel like I'm being my authentic self. And you shouldn't be dishonest, don't get me wrong, but you want to elevate your language to where it speaks to the right people. And if it sounds a little bit different than the way you typically talk, then maybe start thinking about changing the way you talk because what will happen is a incredible positive change is going to happen in your life when you start to elevate your language. It's going to start changing the way you think. It's going to change the way you make decisions, and your own altitude is going to raise just from changing your copy. But if you keep saying, well, it's not in my voice, it doesn't sound like my brand, well, the changes that you make may not seem like a big deal. The word that you change here or there, the sentence that you restructure may not seem like a big deal. You may think, well, it's pretty much what the copywriter gave me. It'll still work if I put it out there. It'll still bomb if you break the things you're not supposed to be breaking. That's why you should not try to repair a machine and you don't know how if you don't know how it's built, right? Most people do not understand, and AI does not understand the difference between copy that signals to high altitude people and low altitude people. I asked it the other day, it pretended it knew, but when I started actually looking at the things it was creating, I said, "Hey, what about this? You did this wrong." And I started correcting it, and it even admitted that it had gotten it wrong. So you can't just use naked AI to do this. The good news is I have a book coming out that's going to actually teach you, based on my 20 plus years of experience, how to do this. Okay. So those are 3 points we've talked about today. Outsourcing their emotional regulation is a signal to low altitude buyers. Cost avoidance framing, this one's taught by a lot of so-called marketing experts out there, is going to attract low altitude buyers. Giving them an identity that they have not earned is going to attract low altitude buyers. It will get, and the tricky thing about that third one, it'll get more of the low altitude people to buy because it is compelling for them. They don't want to act against the identity that they see themselves in. So that one's really tricky because if you start to do it, like if you hire a copywriter and they go in there, okay, we're going to do what's called identity selling, and they start changing it, you're going to see a bump in conversions, but you're going to reach a lid at one point because you're still going to be attracting the wrong type of people. You're not going to be able to scale your business. They're going to create a lot of chaos. They're not going to bring you referrals. They're going to be more likely to quit. They're not going to pay you the prices you really deserve to be making as an expert. Now, I have an entire book that teaches people the right way to do identity framing. That's a whole other issue. But if you want to apply this, I do have the book coming out. But if you're also listening to this and you're thinking, wow, I'm realizing I have a lot of work to do on my messaging, and I'm realizing that changing my messaging in my business is going to change everything. It's going to change everything. So follow me on the channel where you found this, whether it's Instagram, whether it's YouTube. If you're on Instagram, go to my profile, go to my YouTube channel, follow me there. If you're on Facebook, go to my YouTube channel, follow me there. That's where all of my live content comes out. And I have about 25 books on persuasive communication and copywriting that can help you to actually transform your messaging and attracting the right type of people. And also what type of funnel you're actually supposed to be using for your audience, how to write a book that positions you as authority instead of a book that never gets read. All those things come down to your messaging. So that's it. Thanks for attending today. Good luck with this. If you are interested in getting the book, make sure to send me a message. I myself will not respond, but my VA will respond and make sure